You're listening to a podcast by the Center for Action and Contemplation. To learn more, visit cac.org.
Greetings, I'm Jim Finley.
And I'm Kirsten Oates.
Welcome to Turning to the Mystics.
Welcome everyone to Turning to the Mystics, where we're turning to T.S. Eliot and his poetry in the 4 quartets. And I'm here with Jim to discuss his third session. Welcome, Jim.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Glad to be together again with our listeners.
In the third session, you focused on the third poem in 4 quartets called Dry Salvages. And you opened with sharing that it's actually a place off the northeast coast of Cape Ann, Massachusetts. I actually looked it up. There's images online for the place. And it helped me to look at the images as you discuss one of the key themes of this poem, which is that our interface with the primordial.
Yes, it shows you his sensitivity to the spirituality of place. Because when he would vacation in the summers at Cape Ann and look out, he could actually see it as a small outcrop of rocks.
Yes. With
a beacon to warn ships so they wouldn't crash on the rocks. And then he saw layers of meaning. He took something like that, and that becomes the leaping off place. You know what it reminds me of? There's a passage in Gabriel Marcel, and he talks about a deep thought. And he said, well, what is a deep thought? He said, it's like standing at the shore of the ocean, and you look out in the distant fog, in the distance in the water, there's an island. The deep thought is you realize the island is inside of you. See, that's T.S. Eliot. He sees the mythic layering of concrete places in our life and invites us to be sensitive to that also.
Yes. Well, looking at the pictures of it, it looks very primitive. I'm going to use the word raw, which in my accent, people don't normally understand. R-A-W, raw. Although it has the beacon, it's very untouched, and there's birds that cover it, there's seals on it. It's surrounded by deep blue water, the sky, all you can see is sky above it. So it feels really untouched by, the industrial age, by technology, by, those sorts of things. Yeah, so I just encourage listeners to perhaps look that up to get a sense of what he's pointing us to. And Jim, in the reflection on the poem, you said, nature is God's first scripture. And I wonder if you could who said that, and maybe you could help unpack that.
That's found in the classic text, I think, of all the world religions in different ways. And because, see, when God said, let there be light, and let there be stones and trees and stars and so on. So what we have in creation is God's ongoing self-donating act of the manifested presence of God as the gift and the miracle of the world, of the passage of time, the way the light of the day yields to the darkness of the night, and the night to the day, the smell of roses. And so all this is created and is being perpetually created by God. So that the world is God's body, and it is bodying forth the love that's uttering it into being. So we can, this is so deep in the Christian tradition too, the contemplation of the world as incarnate infinity is holy.
Because if we think about the Bible and Christianity and the scriptures, they came about at a certain point in time.
That's right.
Well beyond the beginning of time. And so this primordial way of looking at things, that God was always present. And there was a spirituality to humanity even prior to the Bible and scripture. And
so in indigenous peoples and shamanistic lineages and so on, and the primitive cave drawings that they found.
Yeah.
So there's something like a primordial, primitive spiritual sense. So with the scriptures, the revelation of scripture, it explicates the divine origin of the holiness of the world. In the beginning, God said. But it's explicating is there, the divinity, so different lineages of that revelation through world religions. Yeah.
It's really helpful to step back and see things in that way. And it's helpful to see why nature is so illuminating to us, where it can be a ground for these kind of spiritual experiences. Well, let's move into the poem, and it starts off, "I do not know much about gods, but I think that the river is a strong brown god." What a wonderful opening. Yeah, to see the river as a god. And Jim, you show us that there's ways that these primordial aspects of creation that we've lost touch with them. We've forgotten their power, both on the positive side, how they're life-giving, we die without water, but also how they have their own life that we can't control.
When the river, the primordial reality of the river, a great brown god, when it's experienced by the ego in sequential time, it's experienced as a boundary to, like, how do I cross this? How do I deal with it?
Yeah, yeah.
And so then when we build the bridge, which is science and technology and engineering, it helps us to move in linear time more effectively. The traffic rolls on and on. And so in a way we're relieved that we don't have to deal with the river. Almost, but the river keeps its own time. It's almost like personifying it. It just waits. So every so often when the floods come, it reminds us of what we try to forget, that we're not in charge. Until it recedes, then we forget again. And so tornadoes, fires, earthquakes, floods. It isn't just that there's that, but because we've lost experiential contact in the universality of the primordial, it's in the nursery bedroom, in the rank smell of flowers, in the smell of grapes at harvest time. We've lost this kind of timeless time of the primordial world, the divinity of it. And so the poem is all about how the price we pay for being exiled like that, and how through the poem are the ways we find our way back to this ground, and how do we be healed from that estrangement.
Yes. So, Jim, you say the deeper problem, one of the deeper problems he's trying to show us is this worshipping of the machine. And he talks about in the poem that we've chosen to forget, we're not honoring the sacred nature as sacred, but also like our oneness with it. So we try and control it and objectify it. And he's trying to help us see that.
Yeah, and there's this critical little phrase where he says the river is within us, because our body's primordial.
Yes.
Our breathing, our heart is beating. It's almost like it isn't there till something goes wrong with it. Then how do we fix it to get back so that I don't have to be aware of it again? And notice how, and there's something to that. I mean, when something does go wrong, it hurts. We try to get better. I try to get better. But it's almost like the Jesus prayer, these mystical traditions, like the breathing, the sitting, we're trying to find ourselves to the primordial divinity, the immediacy that our own body embodies, like we're exiled from ourself.
Yes, I love that line in the poem, "The river is within us, the sea is all about us," really pointing to that sense of the sacred within us, but also our oneness with nature, with the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And then, Jim, even right from part one, T.S. Eliot continues with what he's doing throughout this poem, which is to try and help our consciousness shift into not only this deeper connection to the primordial and the sacred, but also the release from time. And so just reading from the poem, "And under the oppression of the silent fog, the tolling bell measures time, not our time, rung by the unhurried groundswell, a time older than the chronometers, older than time counted by anxious, worried women." Yeah, and so he's starting to help shift our consciousness in relation to time.
That's right. So I want to paraphrase it.
Thank you, yeah.
T.S. Eliot in this section speaks of buoys and sometimes speaks of groaners. And I looked this up, it's kind of confusing on the definition of these words. In some sense, that a buoy is a thing floating in the water to warn ships not to crash along the rocks. And there's a bell. And so the rise and the fall of the water clangs the bell. And so the woman at night who can't sleep, trapped in time, hears the clang of the bell in the dark, which is this primordial time. In other places, the groaner, it sounds almost like a whistling sound or like a noise that it makes. And so it seems that there were these different floating devices to warn ships from not crashing on the rocks. And that's the point about Dry Salvages, is that there's also not the buoys, but there's a beacon. That is, there's a light. And so it's very paradoxical. There's a light, but it's a light that warns people not to hit on the rocks because they'll drown and die if they don't. So it's another one of these subtle little paradoxical refinement of insight that T.S. Eliot keeps constantly making about our life in the midst of time, in the places of this world. So there's a sequential time, and that's true. But there's a primitive, timeless time. And lying awake at night, you can be caught up in sequential time. You're frustrated, you can't sleep. But also, if you would just listen to the clanging of the bell in the dark and the swell of the water, it's a gateway into timeless time. You know, it's like an opening into kind of a deeper place.
It's amazing the way he keeps expanding our vision of time within the world that we live in, like looking at a longer arc of history, at looking at different ways time is measured. That's one way he's opening us, expanding our consciousness of time, and then always towards this eternal time.
Also, I think another thing he's helping us do when we think about it is notice when, say we're in an intimate conversation with someone, like deeply absorbed, or the sunset or the art museum, or listening to the rain, notice that if it's sustained, when the moments pass, you have to look at your watch, you don't know how much, you weren't in time. Mm-hmm. See, that was in the earlier poem, Under the Grape Arbor, in the drafty church at night at smokefall. So he's inviting us to be sensitive. We all taste this timeless time. And just tasting it and being aware of it, the poem is helping us, like a meditation or a way to pray, to be more consistently in that interconnectedness of the timeless time, which is the deathless presence of ourself.
Yes. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your sense of sleep and insomnia. I'll read the last section because it so reminds me of nights where I've lied awake worrying about something. So it says, time counted by anxious, worried women, lying awake, calculating the future, trying to unweave, unwind, unravel, and piece together the past and the future. Between midnight and dawn, when the past is all deception, the future is futureless, before the morning watch, when time stops and time is never ending, and the groundswell that is and was from the beginning clangs the bell.
So let's say a sleepless night. Mm-hmm. And let's say a sleepless night, you're concerned because if you don't get to sleep, you won't do well the next day. And so you're lying there awake, but you can't turn your mind off. Mm-hmm. See, the running of thoughts. And that's real. I mean, you do your best to cope with it. But what T.S. Eliot is suggesting, I was once leading a retreat somewhere, they talked about never wasting a sleepless night. And he called it power lounging. So you lie there in the dark. Yes, that's really true. I can't get to sleep. But notice sleep is primordial. Every night I disappear from myself in the world and I go into my dream world. And in the morning I come back. It's very mysterious how we move back and forth. So sleep is primordial. But if the sleep is primordial, insomnia is primordial because I'm not in charge. The sequential me can't make it stop. So what if instead of simply fretting over this duration of a time without purpose, what if instead we would ponder insomnia? Now, see, lest we be presumptuous about sleep, presumptuous about the ability to take our next breath. The sleep, we should never take anything for granted. And so the insomnia then is itself primordial. So if instead I would just quietly listen and gaze into the incomprehensible depths of insomnia, I'd probably be asleep in 5 minutes. In other words, if I would just accept the primordial immediacy, which is deeper than my concern about what I want to do the next day.
Yeah.
It also allows me to drop down into the timelessness of the insomnia, in which sleep has a much better chance of happening to me.
Yes. Do you find, Jim, part of the way of dropping down into the primordial nature of something is to sense how throughout history people have struggled with insomnia. And so in my insomnia, I'm one with everyone who's ever had a sleepless night.
Yes, and when we were doing this section on Thomas Merton, Turning to the Mystics, and he's lying awake, he had insomnia, and he's lying awake in the middle of the night on a straw mattress in the dorm, there in the monastery. And he's lying there, he can't sleep, and he says, suddenly the bed becomes an altar, and in a distant city somewhere, someone is suddenly able to pray. See? So that somehow our insomnia doesn't belong to us. Our insomnia, the empathic sensitivity, unites us with the sleeplessness of people all over the world who can't sleep. Our suffering doesn't belong to us. And therefore we can let our insomnia be an empathic sensitivity to the sleeplessness throughout the whole world and be kind of tender-hearted towards it, or kind of walk with it, and be merciful towards it. Mm-hmm. Exactly, yeah.
I love the way it ends with clangs the bell, because it's like the meditation bell, you know.
Right.
It
is. And by the way, let's say sometimes when we do these recordings, you can hear my clock chime.
Yes.
So in the middle of the night, I'm lying there in the dark when I can't sleep, because sometimes I'm walking around all night in the dark. And I can be there in my sleeplessness, and the clock chimes. And when it chimes, it reminds me of the timeless time.
Yes.
You know? Yeah. It's like it's always there. Yeah.
It's a beautiful chime, your clock.
It is, yeah. It is beautiful. It's a ship's clock, too.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ah. Okay, well, part 2. This poem, so we could talk forever about just about every line of this poem. But
we can't. You know why? Because we don't have time.
We don't have time.
So we have to move on in our timelessness.
Okay, so let's see. This section, there's a play on the word annunciation. So it starts off where annunciation is spelt with a lowercase a, and then, you know, about halfway through it moves to an uppercase A. So could you just help unpack that word and what he's doing there?
Yes. The word annunciation is like an announcement, a revelation. So the lowercase annunciation, the silent listening to the undeniable clamor of the bell of the last annunciation, which is death. To whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. That's the last annunciation, in lowercase letters. But hidden in the depths of the enunciation of death in the lowercase letters is the enunciation with a capital A. The bone's prayer to death, it's God. Only the hardly bearable, prayable prayer of the one enunciation with a capital A. And the one enunciation with a capital A is the angel Gabriel announced to Mary that you're going to bear the fruit of your womb, Jesus. And so the whole world is waiting for her acceptance, her yes, to surrendering to that. And so that's the deathless annunciation of the eternality shining out through her life, through our life, all the way through. So the little annunciation in linear time is real to the little linear self, because you're dying and I'm dying. But to hear the annunciation with a capital A is the eternality of the birthless, deathless mystery of ourself as God's beloved. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And so he's starting to merge those two realms. Yeah.
So it's pointing to the fact of, if it's only just life and death, life and death, life and death, never ending, it's a time to despair, and the suffering has no meaning. But this annunciation that comes in through Mary can give us a shift in consciousness.
That's right. And there's another way to look at this also, is that the annunciation with a capital A is the virginal newness of the present moment. See, because from whence does it arise? If you're lying awake at night listening to your breathing, to be at the deathbed of the dying loved one is so clear, your next breath doesn't belong to you, it belongs to God. And so the next time you take a breath, from whence does it arise? And that's the annunciation with a capital A, the welling up of the eternal gift that never passes away, that shines out to what's endlessly passing away. That's the subtle meditative state he's trying to help us be sensitive to that and learn to live there.
Yeah, yeah. So it doesn't change the present moment, it just deepens. We find something deeper in it. Yeah. This reminds me, Jim, I did want to bring up that image you created at the end of the episode, because I think it's so relevant to touch on throughout this poem. But you talked about the time, the horizontal, drawing a horizontal line and then a vertical line. Can you just, how would that apply to this enunciation section?
Yes, it's a poetic image. It helps me to see this. Like these metaphors can be very helpful. So let's say the horizontal line is our experience of ourself and our passage through time from birth to death. So you and I are on this line right now, and breath by breath, we're moving closer towards our death, and will vanish away as mysteriously as we emerged. And here we are in time. Like I can look at my wristwatch right now and see what time it is, and time is clicking away. That's always there. But if right in the middle of that line is the vertical depth dimension of the eternity of God, and the eternity of God is welling up and giving itself as the reality of the horizontal line, as its manifested presence. So when we're in the midst of the busyness of the day, we're nowhere near even the awareness of that intersection because of the next meeting. Life is labor intensive. I mean, it's hard. But in meditative states, in these moments that he's reminding us to meditate on, or even being meditatively present to the poem is helping us to stay there. In meditative states, we can start drawing closer to the intersection. Mm-hmm. And there is a moment where the inner quiet can become so subtle, like so delicate. It's so delicate we can't maintain awareness of ourself and reflective consciousness. And that's a moment of the intersection of time and eternity, a moment of oneness prior to the difference. There's a moment prior to the difference, like the indistinction, prior to and beyond the distinction. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in that moment, we're a momentary mystic.
That moment is where time and eternity are one.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when we come out the other side and return to time, we remember that moment. And we experience it as homecoming. Like it graces us, or it gives experiential vibrancy to what faith proclaims. Like I know it's true because I experienced it. But then it starts dawning on you that deep down, every moment is that moment. And then I become aware of how unaware I tend to be of the zero variance. And become aware that I'm unaware is the longing to abide there, which is the path. Mm-hmm. And the poem, as Lectio Divina, is the prayer that lures us toward learning how to habitually be stabilized in the divinity of the unfolding of the present moment. It's the eternality of the present moment.
Beautiful. That's so helpful, Jim. And this next section just seems to really speak to exactly what you just described. This is T.S. Eliot, one of T.S. Eliot's ways of saying this. I'll just read it and you can comment. It seems as one becomes older that the past has another pattern and ceases to be mere sequence or even development, the latter a partial fallacy encouraged by superficial notions of evolution, which becomes, in the popular mind, a means of disowning the past, the moments of happiness, not the sense of well-being, fruition, fulfillment, security or affection, or even a very good dinner, but the sudden illumination. We had the experience but missed the meaning. An approach to the meaning restores the experience in a different form, beyond any meaning we can assign to happiness. I have said before that the past experience revived in the meaning is not the experience of one life only, but of many generations, not forgetting, something that is probably quite ineffable.
Well, my sense is this, really, is that there are moments where we experience what this is inviting us to discover.
And it's what you described as that, where the intersection of the vertical.
The all moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in the midst of nature, the arms of the beloved, looking into the upturned face of a small child, the long, slow walk to no place in particular, the quiet hour at day's end, the art, whatever, sitting at the deathbed of a dying loved one. There are moments where this washed over us. So we experienced it, but we missed the meaning. Namely, we walked right past the eternality, the deathless presence of ourself in the passage of time.
Mm-hmm.
An approach to the meaning, but through the help of the poem, I can meditate on the meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, really, a lot of therapy is this way too. It's like refining the subtlety of allowing you to listen with greater clarity to the interior stirrings of your own experience. Like not to walk right past it, but to be present to it. An approach to the meaning restores the experience. Notice, once I go, that's right, I remember that. That fleeting wonder of that moment didn't have about it the feeling of that which ever ends. And by reflecting on that, it helps me restore the true nature of the experience, which was the gift of experiencing that, like appreciating that. And when we reflect on it, it reveals a meaning which is quite ineffable, namely unfigure-outable. It's not something that if you just think about it enough, you can figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But if you sit with it long enough in receptive openness, you can realize, although you can't understand it by comprehending it, you can intimately realize what you cannot comprehend. Because if you could explain it, it would just be another fact of the self in sequential time. But when you're sharing a moment from your heart of intimate stirring of the unexplainable, it's the divinity of life, the sacredness of life. It's like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's so hopeful too that the way he says the past experience revived in the meaning is not the experience of one life only, but it's that sense that I can look back on my life and see the meaning in it, even though I might not have experienced it in the moment, that nothing's wasted in a way.
Yeah. The two examples I use is imagine you're going through an old drawer up in the attic somewhere or something, and you find a diary you kept, say, 10 years ago. You even forgot you wrote it. And you sit down, and as you read it, the things you worried about, the things you were certain of, the things you were surprised about. And what's so amazing is the you that wrote it could see the you that was reading it. She'd faint. And yet we labor under the illusion we're finally figuring it out. We write it in our journal. But if the you that's writing tonight's journal could see the you that's going to read it 10 years from now, if you're still alive, you'd faint again. And what if that goes on forever?
Yeah.
So what if you could learn then the unfigure-outable unfolding of the plenitude of life? And it's also not one life only, because it's everybody's life. That each of us is a unique edition of the universal story of being a human being. It's unfolding as my life, as your life, or the life of everyone who lives. For the more experiential self-knowledge we have of ourselves, it allows us to have this knowledge of everybody, like empathy.
Yes. Beautiful.
Down through the ages. Turning to the mystics will continue in a moment.
Many of us feel increasing anger at injustice, violence, and indifference in our world today. Join us March 14th for What Do I Do With My Anger? An online gathering featuring Richard Rohr and Brian McLaren. Learn ways of transforming anger into loving action, inspired by Father Richard's new book, The Tears of Things. Register today at cac.org/anger. That's cac.org/ANGER.
What does it mean to embody salt and light? In 2025, Richard Rohr's daily meditations turn to Jesus' timeless metaphor for reflecting love into the world. Amid this season of uncertainty, join us in living with trust, being salt and light. For 18 years, the daily meditations have inspired thousands of readers like you. Subscribe today at cac.org/saltlight2025. That's cac.org/SALTLIGHT2025.
Well, let's move on to part 3, and we're going to where it talks about, I sometimes wonder if that is what Krishna meant. And now we get an introduction into Hinduism and the Bhagavad Gita. It's amazing T.S. Eliot's range of understanding of these mystical lineages.
Yeah, you could tell he was he went to Harvard and Oxford. Not only was he an academic scholar in literature, but you could tell he very seriously studied mystical traditions. As a matter of fact, his poetry embodies those traditions.
Yes.
So the very people he quotes are the very people that are illuminating the poem.
Yes.
And this is what makes it, turning to the mystics for guidance. This is what makes it a contemplative text.
Yes.
When we see it this way.
Yes, it's beautiful. So, Jim, can you just tell us a little bit about the Bhagavad Gita? And you actually read from it in the session.
Yes. So, in each world religion, there's texts. There's also primordial texts of indigenous people. There's oral traditions. But in the written tradition, there's a text. So in Judaism, you have the Torah and the prophets. In Christianity, you have also the Old Testament. Jesus was a devout Jew, really a Jewish mystic, if you look at it phenomenologically. It's the Christ. And we have the Gospels and the letters of the New Testament. And then we have the Holy Quran, given by God to Muhammad the prophet, blessings be upon him, the prophets this way. And then we have the sutras of Hinduism in India, the Yoga Sutra, and the branches of yoga this way.
And what's a sutra, Jim? What's a sutra?
A sutra, the root word of sutra means a thread.
Okay.
It's a thread that weaves us into the divine. So that when you read the sutra, like you're woven into this logos that embodies divinity when you read it with an open heart. So we would say that the sayings of Jesus are sutras in that way. They're like threads of divinity. So when we read it, the Psalms are that way, chanting the Psalms. We could use that. They're like threads that weave us into the texture of we and God form one fabric together this way. And so what we have then in this Hindu tradition, then you have in the Hindu tradition these deepening layers of realizations. So in each one you have the mystical understanding of those texts.
I see.
And then you have mystical text, which is what we do in Turning to the Mystics podcast. This is our wheelhouse. This is where we hang out this way. And so in the Hindu tradition, in one of these texts, of the collected texts, is the Bhagavad Gita.
So it's a mystical text in the Hindu tradition.
It's a mystical text, and it's a mystical text. It's like a lot of these texts in the old too. It's a story, and it's a story about someone going into battle, and really it's a metaphor for the battle of life. And Arjuna, who's in the chariot, he's with the Lord Krishna, who's seen as an avatar of God, like an incarnate presence of God, and they're going into this battle. And in the midst of as they go into the battle, Arjuna tells Krishna, I don't want to do this. Because it was a fight among the clans in India, this struggle. And I don't want to do this because I don't want to kill these people. And I don't want to die. So it says, Krishna listens to him and he says, your words sound wise. He said, but what you don't see, and this is Advaita, nobody dies. Their body dies, but they're not reducible to it. And by the way, if you die, you're not going to die either. Atman, the Brahman, the Atman, the inmost self, is the manifested presence of Atman. I am that.
Okay.
That we, in Christian language, if we think of God as generosity, this is paraphrasing Meister Eckhart, if we think of God as generosity, the generosity of the infinite is infinite, and we are the generosity of God. We are the song God sings. See, we're the deathless beloved. And so go to the battle with clarity. And the battle might be the conflicts of your life, of uncertain outcome. Thomas Merton once said, those committed to social justice must be very careful not to be too caught up in the outcome of their efforts, because maybe by human terms it's going to go down in flames. But that's not the point. That's not the point. There's the indestructible truth of the love that you're bearing witness to in the world this way. So that's the tone. Of the Bhagavad Gita. And so the whole poem is a dialogue back and forth on the different layers that if we follow the poem, like we're following T.S. Eliot, it leads us into deeper awareness of the deathlessness of ourself, the divinity of ourself, and our eternal nothingness without God. So it's a lovely text. It's a beautiful text, the Bhagavad Gita.
Written a long, long time ago, before the Bible?
Yes.
Yes.
This is before the Bible.
Yeah. So the fact that it's situated in a battle is probably reflective of the time and place that there would have been a lot of battles going on.
There were, because it was, they divided up in clans, like small clans. They were always battling with each other,
Yeah.
fighting. So it's just like we're in a period of history. This was written in a period. But notice, in our period of history, there's also our awareness, like the troubled times of our times.
Yes. Yes.
And so how do we learn to ground ourselves in an eternal presence that allows us to be present to the troubles of the times without drowning in the troubles of the time? So that's the timeless relevance of texts like this.
Of the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, how amazing. Yeah, there's always been troubled times. Jim, in the discussion about the Bhagavad Gita, you mentioned 3 gods, I think. Yeah, could you just help unpack that for me?
Yes. Let's say that all of us are created by God in the image and likeness of God. And being created by God in the image and likeness of God, we're also created with the capacity to be awakened to ourselves as the manifested presence of God in our nothingness without God. And we're also then graced with the freedom to assent to it, because love is never imposed, it's always offered. And that's the universality of the sacredness of the human condition. And so each world religion is a person being awakened in a specific culture or specific time in which they transcend the limitations of the culture and the time. But also, it's culture bound. And then when they try to put words to it, they use the words of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so really they're like dialects of ineffability. They're like different dialects of the universality of awakening. And so just like in our tradition, we have the Trinity. I love Romano Panikar, the philosophical theologian. The Trinity said the Trinity is Christ's mind, because God sometimes referred to God as Abba, Father. He sometimes referred to himself, he who sees me sees the Father. And I will send you the Paraclete, the awakener of your hearts. And so the Trinity, the dance of God of the Trinity, Richard Rohr's book too on the Trinity, that's the Christian contribution to the transcendence of God, transsubjective communion. So what you have in Hinduism is a Trinity. You have Brahman, and Brahman is the source, like paralleling to God the Father. He's the source. It's a self-donating act of infinite reality, giving reality. And then Shiva is the destroyer. And in statues of Shiva, you see this dance of Shiva. In one hand, in the dance, he's holding castanets, which is the clicking of time. And in the palm of the other hand is the flame of eternity. So the eternality, the clicking of time. But in the ending of time, Brahman then recreates anew. So the birth, the eternal birthing of Brahman self-donating is born out of the eternal death. And that's the cyclic nature of how it understands things. Now, in that Trinity, in that Trinitarian understanding, is in Vishnu, the sustainer, God sends avatars. And avatars are messengers to teach this to humanity. And so the Lord Krishna, who's on the chariot drive, is an avatar of Vishnu. And they see Jesus as an avatar of Vishnu.
Oh, wow.
So you can go to these temples. There's one up the road here, this ashram, and you see the saint of the world religions, and they see Jesus there along with Vishnu, and they see him as an avatar of Vishnu. And so this is a story then about a battle, metaphorical story. Mm-hmm. The metaphorical story is that Arjuna, the chariot driver, is in sequential time. He sees himself in time, and his guide is Krishna, this avatar of Vishnu. And so a dialogue takes place. He's being instructed, the Advaita, on the divinity of everything, the deathlessness of everything. And that's the Bhagavad Gita.
Okay.
It's really bhakti yoga too. It's a love yoga. It's a love path from the heart.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, wonderful to learn about that. And then T.S. Eliot, I guess he sees these people on the train, the passengers on the train, almost like in their chariot. Is like in the parallel of the day he's in, of these passengers on the train, kind of blind to this eternal sense of things.
That's right. So he's seeing then, just like Arjuna was caught in time. The people on the train are caught in sequential time with their periodicals and being caught in time.
Yeah.
And therefore, the voice of Krishna is this mystical awakening. But it's also the voice of Jesus. It's the voice of all the teachers down through the ages, trying to help us wake up from this dream. The only me that's real is the me that things happen to. The only me that matters is the me that's going to be dead someday very soon. It's not true. And so we're trying to wake up to the deathlessness of ourself.
Yes. Okay, well, let's turn to part 4, Jim. And this is just a very small section, just 3 stanzas. And it's asking Mary to pray. And at the end, it has this perpetual Angelus. So can you help me understand this little section?
First of all, the beacon on Salvages, the light. It now has the image of Mary. See, Lady Mary. And Lady, whose shrine stands on the promontory, pray for all those who are in ships. So it's almost Mary's there with her hand out like this, praying for all those who are in ships, whose business has to do with fish, those just trying to make a living out in the open water, those concerned with every lawful traffic, and those who conduct them, those have to monitor the complexities of all that world. Repeated prayer also on behalf of women who have seen their sons and husbands setting forth and not returning. Then Figlia Dea Tuo Figlio, the mother of the Jesus, Mary is holding her son. But if the son Jesus as a human being is her son, but Jesus as the second person of the Trinity is the father of Mary. And so you get the circularity of time and eternity in the image of Mary.
Just thrown in there. Let's just
Thrown in
remind
like
you about what this is actually
like
about.
a little,
Yes.
like 3 sentences, just toss it in with no explanation. Also, pray for those who are in ships ending their voyage on the sand and the sea's lips on the dark, or in the dark throat which will not reject them, or wherever cannot reach them, the sound of the sea's bells, perpetual Angelus. In other words, pray for all those who died without being aware of the eternality of their life. They just died. It's true of a lot of people, actually. I pray for all of them. But also know the sea bell's perpetual Angelus is a kind of a timelessness that they're caught up in, because sometimes this realization isn't given to us this side of death. It's only in passing through the veil of death that it's given to us. But a lot of people die, just fall off with no awareness of this at all. Many people do. But God's infinitely in love with all of them. They're all deathless and sustained by God, in time. So that's the prayer.
I wonder if you see that this little section teaches us something about prayer and our own prayers.
Yeah, here's one way I put it. Let's say you have Aunt Mildred who's sick, and she's dying. And so you say, "Dear God, please, Aunt Mildred's dying, please help her." It isn't as if God isn't going, "Dying? I didn't even know she was sick." Like, thank me, you told me, I'll get over there right away. See, so what you're really saying, Aunt Mildred is dying, and God says, I know she's dying. If I'm Lord of life, I'm Lord of death. I'm the infinity of life. I'm the infinity of death. So let's pray for Aunt Mildred, that she'll realize the unexplainably trustworthy nature of her deathless death, and for you that you might realize it also this way. This doesn't mean that there shouldn't be the prayer of petition. Knock and we open, seek and you will find. But it's always a seeking and the knocking that's in the light of this underlying trust that God hears us and is resolved in God's ways and often not in our ways. And we pray for that. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Beautiful. And the way we do that for each other, I feel in that image, the figlia del tuo figlio. So you're saying it shows Mother Mary as the mother of Jesus, but Jesus is the kind of the author of Mary, like this.
God the Father eternally contemplated Mary and the Word before the origins of the universe. So when God said, let there be Mary, God said, let there be the woman I'm contemplating in Christ. See, let her be. And therefore the Christ that she's holding is the Logos through whom God created her. But it's true of Mary, it's also true of us, because God contemplated you in the Word before the origins of the universe. And that's the circularity of all of us in time and eternity.
And in a way, that's what you're describing about our prayer life is really it's the hope and trust in that and the pointing to that. Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And go later, like in Buddhist language, see, the Buddhist said, whatever is made apart falls apart. Strive with diligence. That is to say, everything made of parts falls apart, but there is that which is not made of parts. Can you find it? Which is nirvana. And we're saying Christian language, which is salvation. See, can you find the eternality of yourself and of all things this way?
Beautiful. And the way he just slots that line in this sense of this cycle of this place of the people that go out in the ships and the women that pray for them and it's beautiful, the people that are lost there. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, final part 5. So this starts out this section to communicate with Mars. You said it's the god of Mars, converse with spirits, to report the behavior of the sea monster, describe the horoscope. This opening section is talking about the way we as human beings have tried to decipher the past or predict the future through these methods.
That's exactly right. We're trying to foretell things with a palm reading or tarot cards or whatever. We're also trying to decode the past. So we're preoccupied with the present, with the past and the future. And what's missing in the middle is the present. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the poem is headed.
And when you're talking about the presence, the presence that it's missing, is it at that point where the vertical and the horizontal intersect, like that in your image?
Because the poem says, but to apprehend the point of intersection of the timeless with time is the occupation for the saint. No occupation either, but something given and taken in a lifetime's death in love. That is, it's given to you to see this. Mm-hmm. It's the granting of the intersection, this timelessness. But also it's taken, and then once it takes from you the ability to live on your own terms as a gift. And you live on the terms of this timelessness, the perpetual timelessness this way. There's only the unattended moment. I pull a number, wait your turn, moment, the moment in and out of time, the distraction fit, lost in a shaft of sunlight. So there is a moment, but you turn and see a shaft of light across the floor. And for a fleeting instant, the immediacy is something as simple as the light momentarily delivers you from the sequential time that you're trapped in. The wild time unseen, or the winter lightning, or the waterfall, or the music heard so deeply it is not heard at all, but you are the music while the music lasts. In other words, in the moment that you're absorbed in the beauty of the music, of the flowing divinity of reality, you are the flowing divinity of reality while the music lasts. And last meaning, as long as it's lasting in your consciousness. Even when you're not conscious, it goes on and on and on because it never stops. Mm-hmm. Really. These are only hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses, and the rest. So we're guessing it. In other words, we're right at the edges of something very deep. It's not academic. Mm-hmm. It's not challenging because it's academic. It's challenging because we're not used to someone talking about something so atmospherically all-encompassing. This way we're kind of right at the edges. Hints followed by guesses, and the rest is prayer. Observance, fidelity, to live as best you can as God would have you live through love. Discipline, the discipline that love asks of you, all things considered. What's the most loving thing I can do right now for my body, my mind, this person, this animal, whatever. And the thought and the action that's true to that. To think the thoughts that promote love and are grounded in love. And the action that's the loving action. The hint, half guessed. The gift half understood is incarnation. That's the insight, actually. God's one with us in the sincerity of trying to get there. It's not as if there's some place we're trying to get to and we can't find our way to get there yet. Instead, it's realizing God's infinitely one with us in the sincerity of our inability to get there. Or God's one with us in the sincerity of our effort.
Mm-hmm. And is it also saying, Jim, the gift half understood is incarnation? It's how you keep drawing us to God's presence, is the presence of all things.
That's right.
It's incarnation.
That's exactly right. And that's what I meant. I said at the very beginning too. See, when we read this poem, it's just too much. It's too much for me. And thank God it's too much. See, what if the only thing in life was everything that wasn't too much?
Yeah.
It would just be more the finiteness. Mm-hmm. You made our hearts for thee, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. It isn't until we rest in thee that we cannot comprehend. And so the sincerity of being receptively open to what we cannot comprehend, you are the infinity of that, which makes this a lectio, or kind of a prayer when we sit like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the infinity of our incarnated experience, whatever it is.
That's exactly right.
Yes, wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's true.
I love the way he differentiates in that section you just read between, at the beginning, starting people's curiosity searches past and future and clings to that dimension. And then he uses the word apprehend, but to apprehend, so making that distinction that you always make, it's not analyzable, it's not figure-outable, like people clinging to the dimension of past and future.
Exactly. Another way that I put it is this: we cannot attain it, but it unexplainably attains us in the deep acceptance of our inability to attain it.
Yeah, wow.
It came to pass that there washed over me an unlikely hour, where I was quickened by this. I know what the poem's about because it's putting words to what I've experienced this way.
And Jim, just moving to the final piece of this part, it points us to Buddhism. Now we're in this poem now into another deep mystical tradition, and he draws a very important word or very important thing out of Buddhism. This idea of right action is freedom. And so you were helping us understand what the Buddha teaches about right action.
So it's said before that in every religious tradition, there's a way to articulate that dispensation of divinity that is given in that. So in Buddhism, it's how the Buddha expressed what was given to him the night he was enlightened, the infinite divinity of the immediacy of what is. In that night of his enlightenment, he became the Buddha. Once someone said to the Buddha, "Are you human or are you divine?" He said, "I'm awake. I'm awake." So he articulates this in the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha. And the Four Noble Truths is the truth of suffering. The suffering has a cause, which is craving and aversion. And there's a path that leads out of the tyranny of suffering. And it's expressed in the Fourth Noble Truth, which is the Eightfold Path. So right understanding, right attitude, right thought, right action, right. And here, the word right means effective in inviting enlightenment.
I see.
There are all these different attitudes towards all of life, but what is the attitude that's receptively open, that invites the realization that I might realize within myself what the Buddha realized, what Jesus realized? What is the attitude that offers the least resistance to allowing me to see through my own awakened eyes what Jesus saw in all that he saw, which was God? And so that's the whole business of what right means.
And so in a way that line mirrors what he said a little earlier, where he says, hints followed by guesses, and the rest is prayer, observance, discipline, thought, and action. It's like the Buddhist.
That's right.
One of the Buddhist teachings on that.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And so just to close out the poem, for most of us, this is the aim, never here to be realized, who are only undefeated because we have gone on trying. we, content at the last, if our temporal reversion nourish, not too far from the yew tree, the life of significant soil. So this, to me, points to what you teach us with each of these mystics, that it's the desire for God that is the path. And so we're undefeated because we go on following our desire for the infinite.
That's really true. We're undefeated because we don't stop trying. But also, we're trying to realize that although we're not defeated because we have not stopped trying, the grace of the willingness not to stop trying is itself the fullness of what we're looking for. And little getting is going to bring us to that point.
Okay.
And so the very end then, we content at last if our temporal reversion, that is our rethinking, of time, like, which is what the poem is helping us to do, like sifting it out in the light of eternity. Not too far from the yew tree, the life of significant soil. And we were saying earlier, the yew tree is poisonous, but is also seen to be a metaphor for death and life. And the yew trees are often planted around cemeteries, around this way. So we live not too far from the oneness of birth and death. Not too far from the oneness of birth and death. The life of significant soil. And the soil is the humus, or the soil like the earthy ferment of which we live our day-by-day lives.
Bringing us back to that primordial sense of things, like the
That's
river,
right.
the soil. Yeah.
That's right. And also it helps us to see the etymology of the word religion, religio, that religio is a binding. So we have to be rebound because we slipped away from it. But although we slipped away from it, it never slipped away from us. It's right with us, and one with us is precious in the slippage. And the poem and all these voices of God that speak to us like this poem, it puts us in a sensitivity to that and renews our awareness that it's true.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for taking us through the Dry Salvages. It's got a lot in it. Thank you for helping us unpack it. And I'm really enjoying getting to know this poem. So thank you, Jim, and look forward to next session will be your final session, the fourth
right.
and final poem.
Yeah.
Thank you for today. Thank you, Dorothy and Corey in the background, always helping us. Thank you for listening to this episode of Turning to the Mystics, a podcast created by the Center for Action and Contemplation. We're planning to do episodes that answer your questions. So if you have a question, please email us at podcasts@cac.org or send us a voicemail. All of this information can be found in the show notes. We'll see you again soon.
Do you feel called to walk a more contemplative path? The Center for Action and Contemplation is an educational nonprofit supporting the journey of inner transformation. Our programs and resources will help grow your consciousness, deepen your prayer practice, and strengthen your compassionate engagement with the world. Learn more about our resources, such as publications, podcasts, email series, and events at www.cac.org.